right, so here we go. Number 2, first challenge, it needs to be exactly 180 degrees away from the first handle. So you can see how quickly he has to rotate that so that the handle doesn't immediately flop back onto the body of the piece. Again, that centrifugal force, that really quick rotation forces the handle out and away. And beautiful symmetry right there. And so a lot of communication happening right now between Jim and Jay, where Jim is, talking to Jay about the heat of that handle. The second one, or the most recent handle that you apply, is going to be the hottest and softest. So when you go for a reheat, that one wants to start moving around a lot faster than the first handle. And so if you heat a little bit too long, or if you even turn a little bit too fast, that can create the centrifugal force that'll make more of a bow shape and lose that symmetry. So kind of these quick heats and flashes are going to help maintain the shape. And so right at the tip where these little handles are cut free from the steel that Jeff presents, it leaves kind of a sharp, blunt mark behind. It's not particularly elegant. So what Jim likes to do is he goes in and he torches the tip of that handle. He kind of pulls it to a nice tapered point, and then he just curls it over a little bit. So it just gives it a really kind of elegant design. On a snowy day like today, we've got a really great view of the heat in the glass. As he's working with it, every time he comes out of that reheating furnace, you can see the glow of the glass. You can see how bright orange it is. But you should also be noticing how quickly that orange glow is fading, right? And particularly when the glass is thin, and as he's touching those little tips of those handles with his different tools, the tools are further cooling the glass or expediting that process. And so he just has seconds to get the job done. So maintaining the nice high temperature is so important. If this glass falls below about 1,000 degrees, we will find out, because below that threshold, the glass is really susceptible to thermal shock. It's going to crack and break. What happens is that as the glass is cooling down, it's shrinking a little bit. It's not a shrink that you can see with your eyes, but we know the glass is shrinking. And so the outside skin of the glass and the very thin, very dainty parts, they're going to cool and shrink really rapidly. But the thicker areas, well, that's going to cool and shrink more slowly. They have more thermal mass. And so when you have an object that's shrinking at uneven rates, it's building all of this stress and tension into this little piece of glass, so it will just rip itself apart. That's how it's going to relieve that stress and tension. And so the way that we manage it is just by keeping the temperature nice and high above that threshold. We want to keep it above 1,000 degrees. And the way that we save anything that we make in here is by cooling it down very slowly in a process that we call annealing. So these big black cabinets that you see all around the shop, these are actually annealing ovens. And we've got one that's set at 905 degrees Fahrenheit. So when we're finished making this lid today, we load it into the oven. When the oven's full, we turn it down and it slow cools all the glass inside. These objects that we're making will probably be safely annealed in about 12 hours. But that long, slow cool down lets the thick and thin parts shrink together. All right, so here we go. Handle number 3. Beautiful. So something else that's particularly impressive to me about this process is how perfectly he spaces all of his handles apart. There's no special tool or measurement that he's taking to, say that this handle is going to be 180 degrees away from the next one. It just comes down to his experience and his ability to eyeball it. If he were to misalign the handle, if he were to stick that too far to the left or right, too bad, okay? Maybe we would have 5 handles instead of 6 handles. Maybe it would be a quick design change, but something tells me he's going to get it just right. so this is a really well choreographed team. It almost is like a dance, the way that the artists have to move together. As Jay is flashing the piece, he's taking a heat on it, Jeff is timing his gather so that Jeff knows he's going to present the next handle right when the glass is coming back to the bench. The heat is going to be just right. Chris and G. Brian are helping to cycle the irons. Every time we gather glass, we want to gather it on a fresh, hot piece of steel. And so making sure that we always have one that's being heated up and ready to go is just a really great example of a finely tuned team that can anticipate the gaffer's needs this way. So here we go, handle number 4. So you can see that little handle lengthening with the centrifugal force. Another little tug helps bring it to the perfect length. Something that Jim is really working to achieve is an even diameter in that handle from the point where it connects to the very bottom to where it makes that second connection point at the very top. And that's was my challenge this morning, presenting handle after handle, is that I wanted to make sure that I had the appropriate taper on the little bit of glass that I presented so that it would make a good, hot, strong connection, but then not kind of fall away from the iron. Bad handle might look a bit like a pregnant snake, right? It might, stick and stretch a little bit, but then have a bigger, thicker spot and then stretch again close to the iron. And, you really don't want that. You want to have a really beautiful, elegant, even draw. And that comes down to the way that you gather the glass, the way that you marver it, the way that you shape it on that steel table. And these are looking really beautiful. So again, if you're tuning in online, if you've got questions, we've got our social media coordinator, Amanda, here, ready to help out. So you can send your questions her way. And also, if anyone has questions out in the audience here, I'm happy to come out and answer. So just flag me down. When I was learning to blow glass, handles were something that I avoided for a very long time, because for me it was a great way to ruin what would otherwise be a nice vase or a nice cup. If you turn it into a mug, you risk destroying it, because if you mess up, there's no do-overs, no take-backs. You'd have to start again from the very beginning of that process. And so I think the only thing harder than making one really beautiful, elegant, fancy handle is making 6 of these matching, elegant, fancy handles. At this temperature, the glass is so easy to snip through. You can see the tools right there on his bench. He has a pair of shears, and they're made of steel. But the glass feels pretty spongy at this temperature, a bit like snipping through an orange peel. But of course, the longer you wait, the more stiff the glass becomes. That viscosity is changing. All of our shears, they are specially made for glass blowing. They're all handmade tools, but you can cut through shears with tin snips. I know a lot of glass blowers who have bone-sized shears from gardening in their toolkits. I'm pretty appalled that we also have a pair of really beautiful fabric shears that we use in the hot shop to cut through glass. And if you sew or if you quilt, you know what a no-no that is, to use your fabric shears on other materials. But it cuts through glass just fine. But I'd say the biggest difference between, household shears or shears you might run into at the hardware store and the shears we use in the hot shop is that there's space between the blades and the handles. You can see there's a little bit of buffer room just so that you have a little bit more comfort as you use that tool. Your hand is so close to the glass. This is one of the rare times where we'll see the gaffer wearing a glove in the hot shop. You know, his fingers are so close to the glass. He's cutting these handles off at an incredibly high temperature. And so just to spare his knuckles from potentially being grazed against the glass, he's got that glove on. And so each time coming back from the reheating furnace, you can see he's addressing the glass that's close to the pipe. He's using the little MAP gas torch right on that section. You know, that's still the most vulnerable section. That is where it's all connected to the steel. It's the last end to go into that heat. And it's also an area where we have designed a breaking point. You know, later on, we're going to want to free this entire object from that piece of steel. So he made a constriction line, which is where we want to eventually crack the glass, but we don't want thermal shock to take over and do it before we're ready. So here we go, adding these handles between the other two. You know, it's becoming a lot more precarious. He has a lot less space to get his tools in there, but again, just perfectly aligned. Grabs it, stretches it, swings it, drapes it, sticks it, and nails it. Beautiful. So we had a question online about what it is that we're making. And so this is a beautiful caged finial that's going to sit on top of a lid, which will be on top of a matching goblet. And so this is going to be put together in many pieces and parts, but our goal today is to finish this cage, and we'll make a blown glass lid, and then if we have time today, we might make the vessel as well, but that might be tomorrow's project. Tomorrow from 10 a.m. until noon, and then from 1 until 4, we are going to be working with Jim again, right here in the amphitheater. Nice. So we've got about 250 people joining us online right now, which is great. Welcome. Let us know where you're from. Let us know if you've got any questions. Got Amanda here in the hot shop to help field those questions. And so we have all 6 handles attached right now. He's curled over the tips of each of those handles, and he's looking for that beautiful radial symmetry. He wants to make sure that the curl, the drape, and the arc in each handle matches. And now he's going to start adding additional design elements. If this weren't complicated enough, these are about to get very frou-frou, a lot of flair going on. So the first thing they make are what look like little points kind of coming off the tip. So he cuts a little bit free here. Oh, looks like he's going to have Jeff bring over another bit. Notice the way that Jeff gathers the glass, the way that he marvers it and shapes it on the steel, and even the angle at which he holds the steel when he comes over to present it to Jim, the way the glass is going to flow back onto the metal or flow off of the metal, is going to influence the way that Jim's able to apply it to his piece. And so for each of these style bits that he wants to add, there's a appropriate or best way to present it. And so he kind of folds it over, makes a second connection point with his tweezers there. So it kind of makes a little triangle of negative space. And then I love this. He just kind of whips the glass away. He doesn't even need to cut it free. He just pulls it like it's extremely hot, stringy, stretchy pizza cheese. Okay, think about pulling a grilled cheese sandwich apart and watching the cheese break. Well, the way that he strips the steel away kind of pulls to a very fine thread up the length of the handle. Eventually, that's going to get covered up with another bit of glass. But that's a very traditional way to add these design elements, you know, to strip them rather than cut them free. You have a question out there? So here's our second bit being applied. Just going to stick that down, stretch it. Again, timing is everything. If he does this at a different rate than he applied the first one, well, the glass won't stretch and move the same way. So we had a question from our audience, Jim. They're curious to know if you sketch all of these beforehand, if you do any kind of modeling in a material other than glass. Say large-scale stamps?
Yes.
No? All right, so no drawing comes first? So again, great communication. Every time Jim is ready for that next bit, he gives Jeff the nod so that he knows when to gather, when to move on to the next section.
That thing likes to bell check you. No doubt.
And when we go for these flashes inside the furnace, it's a wonderful way to make sure that the entire piece is staying hot enough. But the nature of that big burner in there is that it wants to kind of blast these very fine details. And so it's a narrow window of success where you have enough heat on the piece to keep it intact, but then you're maintaining all of the very precise placement of these bits and of these handles. So we can see a little bit of glow in the bit that was most recently applied. And so he might have a moment when this piece comes back to the bench where he can continue to stretch it, where he can finesse it, you know, ever so slightly. But probably by about this point, that has reached the same temperature as the other bits. And so if he wanted to just go in and selectively heat one up, it could be pretty disastrous. You know, you want to get the shaping done as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So even here, as he applies the bits, he's holding the blowpipe at kind of a 30-degree angle there. And then he has Jay step in and help to hold that pipe steady. You're just having an extra pair of hands to make sure that it's not moving around, take away that variable. But you have to have a lot of, again, great communication and great trust with your team to negotiate that move. All right, so we got a question online. Did James always know that he wanted to be a glassblower when he grew up? And not the case. His early ambition was to be a garbage man. So, that's maybe not the answer that we expected, but not entirely uncommon for glassblowers. I don't think a lot of people realize that this is something that they can be when they grow up. I know until I turned 11, I wanted to be a babysitter when I grew up. I took a babysitting class. I became a Red Cross certified babysitter, and then by the time I was 12, I was over it. So then I had a career crisis that lasted about 20 years, and I think that's common for most glass artists, and so I don't know if it was exactly the same way for Jim, but, sometimes life just throws a wrench in your plans.
Is that the last one of those little guys?
Yeah, and then we'll do the zipper bit and then another thing.
That's in 2 bits?
No, but fresh.
Okay. Maybe I should use the bigger one. Yeah.
A place called Morgan State's University, right next to Fargo.
Did you go there with the intention of studying glass, or did you find it accidental?
Well, my brother was teaching glassblowing, so I figured it's got to be an easy A.
So when Jim learned to blow glass, he went to Morehead State University, which is near Fargo. And his brother was teaching glass blowing there, so he says he thought that sounded like an easy A. He'd give it a try. And aren't we glad that he did?
Urban hunter. Urban hunter. Less black.
So the next series of bits, we've added these 6 points all around the base of those handles. The next 6 bits are going to trail up the length of them, and they're something that we call zipper bits, or they're sometimes referred to as chit bits, C-H-I-T. But Jeff has just a tiny quantity of glass here. He presents it to Jim, who's going to trail it up the length. And then Jeff has to just very carefully hold the iron very still right in place while Jim follows behind with his tweezers and pinches all these little teeth into that line of hot glass. So when we describe it as a zipper bit, you can see they look like the tines of a zipper, or the teeth of a zipper. And then snips it free. And so for that move to be successful, the glass has to be very, very fresh. You might have noticed that Jeff gathered from the furnace and then walked immediately over to Jim's bench. He didn't marver the glass. He didn't shape it whatsoever. It had to be an appropriate shape, but that all came from the way Jeff was able to wind it onto the end of the steel. The angle that he holds the metal when he's retrieving the glass from that furnace, the rate that he turns, those are the ways that he can dictate the shape without touching it, without cooling it.
All right, we're going to give Megan a little break on the mic. My name is George. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them. All you folks at home watching the live stream, give us some questions. Megan, it's your birthday? No kidding. Well, happy birthday. What a great birthday present to have Jim Mongrain come and work in the shop. So he's getting pretty close to being finished. He's probably about 80% done with this top. So I know they're going to add a couple more of those zipper bits. It's very repetitive. You can see everything is done by 6. So once he's finished putting the zipper bits on it, I think there's going to be a little blown ball that goes on the top. That'll be transferred to a punty iron, and they'll finish the bottom of it, and then they're going to make a lid. So do you folks know what he's making? No idea, right? Do you know what he's making? You got to guess, right? Yeah, it's going to be like a topper for a vessel. Hold on, I have a show and tell. Jim actually has a book that he has made a lot of these pieces, and I'll pass this around. You guys can have a look. So I actually went out when I knew Jim was working today. We had this in our bookstore. It's James Mongrain in the George Strompel collection. So if you guys want, you can go out and purchase this. If you can't afford his work, this is the next best thing. So he's actually making, I looked this up, he made one earlier today, and I found it in the book. Jim was here last year, I believe, and he did a series. He was working on this collection, and this was a piece he made here. This is a really large vessel. It stands about this tall, and this is the lid for it. I'll find the one that he's making right now so you guys can have a look what it's going to look like once it's finished. Actually, there is a good example, the same type, just a different color. So this actually gets fitted to the lid, and he made one earlier this morning, and that's what it's going to look like. That's exactly what you thought it was going to be, right? I knew it. You guys want to have a look at the book? So you're going to see things in there that are like monochromatic, one color, the vessel, the top. But Jim also does a lot of very intricate cane work. So these are some examples of some cane pieces that you might see in some of his work. So you can see in the pattern right here, those are all individual canes that are picked up and blown into those shapes. There's literally 1,000 different types of canes that you can use also. So we're actually live streaming today from 1 till 4, and I'm not sure if Jim's going to have time to make the body or the vessel of the piece. Maybe, but I know that he's going to make the lid. So when he makes either the vessel or the lid, he'll take a measurement so he can make the top to fit exactly together. So Jim's been teaching here over at the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass. All last week, he taught a goblet class, so he's been here for probably 8 or 9 days. But this is the trick. You can see each one of those little pinch bits, Jeff is holding the iron very steady. And it's really important that Jeff brings the same bit and that it's the same temperature each time. It makes it real easy for Jim to make the same size bit then. So I believe Chris is going to make the ball, a little knot at the top. So there's some glass blowing. Chris has put a little puff of air into the end of the iron. He's going to stretch this out. He's going to drop this into a mold called an optic mold, which is going to put ribs on the surface. Now I see Amanda standing here. Do you have a question, Amanda? Two things. We only one at a time.
Somebody is watching this on a second date and she's not impressed.
Somebody is watching this on a second date and she's not impressed. Wow, what did she do on the first date that was impressive.
As he hasn't said. But does Jim like working on a larger scale with objects or smaller?
Does Jim like working on on large scale objects or small scale objects? Well, I think I could probably answer that for him. Jim makes a lot of large scale pieces at his regular job. He actually works for Dale Chihuly, which is probably the most well recognized glass artist in the world. And on their pieces, they're enormous, probably some of the largest scale pieces made today. We actually just got back from a museum called Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas. And we were there with our mobile hot shop because Dale Chihuly had an exhibit there called Chihuly in the Forest. And so he had all these huge, large-scale sculptures set up in the forest. And we were there, supporting that exhibit. So Jim is the head gaffer on Chihuly's team. So probably, I would say 90% of the time he's making giant work. But the 10% of the time that he gets to work on his own work, he's making very fine, intricate goblets. So he works both sides of it, really from the very large scale to the very small scale. Are there any questions from the audience? All right. Do you want to try? Somebody in the audience wants to try. Well, you can try. We have a place across the parking lot at the studio, and you can go over there and try a hands-on experience yourself. You can make a flower, an ornament, a pumpkin. Now, I know the gentleman that's asked that question. He teaches at the studio sometimes, so he can try anytime he wants. So Jeff Mack's actually gathering the bits for Jim. We actually melted some copper blue in that little furnace over there. That furnace holds about 80 pounds of molten glass. Now we have our main furnace over here in the middle of the stage, and that'll hold 1,000 pounds of molten glass. Chris has got that bit ready. They're going to add that. So they stick that on there with a hot bit. We call that a glue bit. And you can see where Chris cut that down with the jack line. They're going to break it free right there. Just like that. Now Jeff's going to make up a punty. It's called a sculpture punty because he's going to leave a little bit of glass off the tip of it so they can actually remove it from that glass later on. So this punty has to hold that whole finial while Jim makes the lid. So we have another piece of equipment over here on the right side of the stage. This is called a garage. And we call it a garage because we park things in there to keep them warm until we're ready to use them later on. So there's actually two doors on this side of the garage. It's the cold side. It's about 1,025 degrees. This is where our thermocouple is. And over here is where the burner is. Now, there's a door on this side too. We put it over here on the left side to keep it cool so it's not moving at all. It kind of stiffens up, but it's still 1,025 degrees. And then once we want to get it back up to temperature, we slide it to the left side over here and heat it back up to about 1,300 degrees. Once we get it to that temperature, we can go back into the glory hole or the reheating furnace without it cracking and breaking. So Jeff's making up the punty right now. This is a very important transfer. This punty has to hold on when they break it free. Usually this is where beginners have a hard time. In the beginning, when you first start learning, it falls on the floor.
Bob Swidergall is asking where the glass comes from.
Bob Swidergall is asking where the glass comes from. So Bob is online watching at home, I assume, in Seattle, Washington. That's where actually Jim is from. And Bob lives in Seattle, and that's usually where we order our glass from. We order our glass from a company called Spectrum. The brand name is called System 96. And that's our clear glass. Now we've actually used some of that recycled clear glass. We put a little copper oxide in it, and we've melted that in the tank that Jim's using. Tell Bob, if you're listening, hello. It's good to hear from you. Now Jim's going to clean up that bottom there a little bit.
Okay, I'll just make that little top part. Yeah, finish it right in. Go right in. So then when that's ready, we'll do the
Thank you. I love it when we have afternoons like this because normally people that come to the museum are just, I would say our regular customers that just come into the museum for a day visit. But on a day like today, we have a lot of glass makers or people that are involved with glass that will come in and watch the demonstration. So this is great. It's a free class. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Bad idea. It's pretty elegant. I just did that because that was my view. That was insane. Yeah, if you do turn the lid off, you flip the gas switch, you have to, it's the flame start toggle, and you have to toggle for the left. And that kills the mold. Otherwise, it won't match. Just toggle it to the left, it turns off. Yeah. Just one quick flick to the left. It's either that one or the other one. I think it's the flame start.
All right, so Jim right now, he's working on the very top. This is going to be the very tip of this finial. And they're going to actually put this on at the very end. So this will finish that finial off. So he's going to actually break this off into the garage. We'll have it on a little scooper or shovel. And once we're puntied up inside of the lid, Jim will torch the top of that and stick that little bit that he's working on right now on the very top. Is this going to be the same shape that he made before? Yeah, the lid? Nice. Yep. So Jay has come out from Seattle with Jim. He was his assistant teaching class all last week. And Jay works at Chihuly Studio also. Jay, you said that you worked there for about 8 years? 4.5 years.
Oh, no, it looks okay.
So you can see Jim just knocked that off on a warm shovel, and Megan's putting that in the garage. And that'll just stay in there until he's ready to attach the whole thing together. Jim, we had a question whether you like to work on large stuff or small stuff, and I kind of told him you work on everything. But is there anything you prefer to work on?
On my stuff, it's usually small to medium.
Yeah.
With Dale, it can be small to extra
super large, yeah. Yep. So as I was saying, Jim said that most of the time with his stuff, it's small to medium. Now, depending on what type of glassmaker you are, will determine what small to medium really is. But most of those vessels in Jim's book are, I think, anywhere from 18 inches tall to 42 inches tall. So. Are there any molds that are particularly difficult to blow into? There are. So we actually have most of the molds that Jim's been using today are straight ribbed molds, or we call them optic molds. And this is what an optic mold looks like. And this one's fairly easy to go into because it's really wide at the top and it's got a taper towards the bottom. So it's pretty easy to fit into that. Now we have some really small ones, like this one, that is a lot harder to fit into. You have to take a small gather and you have to fit it into the mold. So depending on what type of mold you're going to blow into will determine the size iron that you're going to choose to gather on. Now, those are still fairly easy. They're pretty straight. Just drop them in the mold. You blow pretty hard and you pull out. They're really easy to pull out of. Now, the pineapple molds, we have a really large pineapple mold right there, and this is a smaller version. Now, this type of mold, it almost has like these teeth that poke into the glass. So when you go into the pineapple molds, you have to be the right temperature. If you're not hot enough, you can get stuck in the pineapple mold. I see some people out in the audience shaking their head. Has anybody in the audience ever been stuck in a pineapple mold? Oh, I see one guy out there. I would say the majority of people that have used a pineapple mold have probably gotten stuck in it sometime or another. Except me. I've never been stuck in the pineapple mold. Have I been stuck in the straight rib mold? Well, of course. I tried to blow in it while it was in the pickup box. So for all of you guests that have just arrived, this is Jim Mongrain gathering out of the furnace over to the far right. He's a guest artist here for the next 3 days. So we're live streaming right now. There's lots of people that are tuned in at home watching on their computer. But Jim's going to be here tomorrow and Tuesday also. Now, Jim just did what's called a strip gather. If you watched, he came out of the furnace and he had more glass than he wanted, so he let some of that glass run right off into the bucket of water. Now that glass is 100% recyclable. We can actually remelt that the next time we make some copper blue. That copper blue is very stiff, a lot stiffer than the clear that we have in our main tank. So Jim's working on some lids to some vessels that he'll be making later on. These lids have a very fancy finial that goes on the very top. So he's actually made the finial already. It's in our garage. And hey, Brad, when you get a chance, can you take a shot in the garage and take a look at the finial? So in the garage on the right side, it's just sitting in there on a brick. It's not on the floor. We have it propped up on a brick, so it's not touching anything. Chris is going to open the door, and you guys can have a look inside there. So it's just waiting. There it is. Occasionally we'll flip it over, make sure it's not bending or slumping. Yep, that's a good shot. Now once Jim's ready for it, we're going to move it to the left side where it's a little bit hotter so we can heat it up slowly and then go from the garage into the reheating furnace. So that's the reheating furnace that Jay's in right now. And you can see how hot it is. It's about 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit inside that furnace. So you wouldn't want to pull that finial out of the garage on the right side and stick it right into the reheating furnace. Otherwise, if you did that, those little bits that he put on there would start to snap and pop right off of the finial. So we heat it up slowly. We have a technical question.
Why MAP gas as opposed to a Ranger oxypropane?
Why MAP gas as opposed to a Ranger or an oxypropane torch? Well, it's because the MAP gas is a very soft, subtle heat. It's the same reason why, you know, we don't take the finial out of the garage and stick it into the torch. It's all about the temperature. And the MAP gas is a really soft, subtle heat, where that oxypropane torch is a very, you know, hot, super hot heat. It'll melt it very quickly. So here he's going to drop this into a mold. He blows pretty hard. Now he used that pineapple mold, so.
I didn't get stuck.
You didn't get stuck. Are you happy with it?
No, the bubble wasn't down.
The bubble wasn't blown all the way through. So again, when you use the mold like this, especially like a pineapple mold, you want the bubble to go all the way through to the tip. So when you blow into it, you get that even pressure all the way from the top to the bottom. So he's going to make another one.
Do they have a size in between over the studio?
No, this is a good size.
That's okay.
I just have to, I can strip as much as I want.
So at this point, if you watch how Jim sets up the bubble, you know, he's going to inflate this, make that bubble go all the way from the top to the bottom, right here in the beginning, probably. See how he's holding it at a slight angle? The hot glass up, letting that bubble go all the way to the end. Gives it a little swing, stretches it longer. He's really setting this up to drop that into the mold. I mean, right from the beginning, he's thinking about the shape that he needs to have to go into the mold. Do you guys have any questions out here? All right. You can see the guest artist James Mongrain up on the screen. Like I said, he's going to be here for the next until Tuesday. For 3 days, he's going to be here. You can see those little bits of glass on the floor. That's the true color of it, the copper blue that we're using. So Jay is cooling the iron down right now. That's a pipe cooler, and it's a piece of equipment that we can use to really cool the iron. Now, when you go into that furnace, I don't know if you guys noticed, but when you open that door, sometimes you can hear that kick on. It's just blasting heat right out the front, and it heats up the pipe pretty quickly. If you look about a third of the way up the rod, you can see it's discolored, and that's where it gets really hot. So that's where we cool it down. You could hear when you open the door how it really turns the burner right up. Now, when you open the door, it's got a safety switch. It actually turns the burner off so that, flame isn't coming out and blasting you in the face. Now, that tool in his right hand, that's actually folded up newspaper. We take about 10 sheets of the local paper and we fold it into a square, and we soak it in water, get it really saturated. Then we squeeze all the excess water out of it and burn that top layer in, and it works really well for shaping hot glass. Now, we find that the Corning Leader works the best. That's our hometown paper. Yeah. Jim, what do you use in Seattle? The Corning paper. See, I told you guys. So you can see how he's got that nice taper. It's almost kind of shaped like a bullet. It's got that soft taper in the front. He looks at the mold to see, the diameter of it. Now, as he goes up and drops it in the mold, he's holding it straight up and down, and that glass is flowing off the end of the rod, getting even a little more narrow. Here he goes. Brad's going to get the close-up shot. Into the mold he goes. He blows really hard. Now watch, when he picks it up, you see how it picks the mold right up off the floor? How about a big round of applause for Jim? Nice job. That's a pretty tricky part of the process. Now he's looking at the way the bubble is, and he's shaping it specifically for the lid. So this lid is going to have kind of an interior fold, and the edge of it, the very edge or the rim, is going to have to fit inside the vessel. So he'll take a measurement of that. This will be puntied on the inside of this lid so we can stick the finial on the top of it. This is going to be a really tough question. Well, Amanda, we're used to tough questions around here. Go ahead. What's the question?
All right. Since glass making is so old, what did they use before there were newspapers?
So glassmaking is so old, what did they use before newspapers? That's a good question. We should actually ask one of our librarians at the Rackhow Library. So, I would say we should see if we can get a hold of a librarian and find out exactly what they use. Now, once they stop using newspaper, I know they're going to switch to the iPad. So that's the next generation of shaping tool. We're going to use iPad. All right, so Jim's going to put a little bit on the front. He's going to spool this on. You see how he winds it right on. When he has the amount that he needs, he pulls back and he pulls it right off. Now you can see the fire burning off the blades or off the back of Jim's jacks. He uses beeswax to lubricate those tools, and that's what you're seeing catching on fire. So that little button there, they're going to attach a punty to the front of that. And they're going to break it off of the blowpipe so they can finish the opening. So they stick that on the front. They're letting it cool down. You can see he adds a little bit of water to the jack line and a little tap, and it breaks off very easily. So this is how we transfer it from one iron to the other. Now there's an opening in the top. Jim's going to finish shaping that by using the jacks to open it up as wide as he wants. Now Chris has moved the finial from the right side of the garage to the left side, so they're starting to heat that up. They're going to get a little bit of temperature in that, and once Jim has the front of the top opened up, they're going to re-punty that on the inside and put the finial on the top. So Jim will remove a little bit of that material off the front. He'll tweeze it out. He'll use a pair of straight shears to cut in and around the top. So he's getting pretty close. I would say in the next 10 minutes, he'll be finished with this piece. So this is where he's going to widen that top. He'll inflate that a little bit. He's got a tool called a soffietta, which he can blow the front of this up. This is another way that you can actually inflate the glass, even though it's off the blowpipe. So here he goes. There's the soffietta. You can see how it's inflating from the front. As he's pushing in, he's blowing fairly hard, and that's puffing it up. Probably do that one more time. Now, just by heating it and turning it, you can see centrifugal force is also widening it out. Got a lot wider that time. Now he's going to reach in there and pull the lip out. This will be the section that sits inside of the vessel. Rest on the top of that spun out part. So he can use this fluffy torch to specifically heat the punty where it's attached to the iron. So Chris is going to get ready to flash the finial now. Now we're going to turn the glory hole off so it can cool down in there. This is another way that you can make sure it's not going to shock it. All right, Chris is coming in. There he goes. You can see it's got a light glow to it. Now again, those bits that he added are really fine. They're very thin and delicate. You don't want to overheat them or they're going to start to change the shape. So Jim's going to heat up that sculpture punty that they attached to the top of the finial, and they're going to crimp it just a little bit, making sure that that's going to come off of there very easily. So Chris and Jim are talking about the temperature of the piece. We don't normally work with Jim. You know, he's here as a guest artist. He's been here before. But, you know, when you're making things like this, if you make it every day, you know, it becomes a lot easier. Everybody that works here at the museum has a lot of experience also. Chris has been making glass for about 18 years. So he's going to keep track of this piece, making sure that it stays the right temperature. So Jim's going to work on flipping this top around. So this type of punty that they're going to use, we actually roll the edge of it in on a kiln on a brick. Call this a dirty punty because the tip of it has got soft glass, but if it's too hot, it goes to flip back and forth. It's not going to stick to the sides of the punty because that brick will keep it from sticking. You can actually see the brick on the side of the punty on the inside of the cup. Now what's important about that punty is that that's got to come off of there at the end. This is the last punty connection. So once he has the finial on the top and the last little section stuck to the top of the finial, they're going to need to remove it from this punty that's on the inside. So that connection is really, really important. So Jim's going to heat the top of this, top of the cup, and now he's going to start to work on the finial where he's going to heat the little ball. He's going to preheat that so he can stick the little ball on the top of the cup. This is the part that always makes me a little nervous because he's going to crimp where that punty connection is. If you squeeze too hard, you could actually cut it right off the end. So now he's going to work on heating just the tip of that ball. He wants to get this hot enough where he can stick the two together. It's going to fuse hot enough so when we break it off at the end, it doesn't separate at that joint. All right, Jim's going to go grab the lid. Jeff's going to heat the bottom of the ball. Timing is very important. You want to make sure that two come together just at the right time. All of this work that Jim's been working on for the last hour and a half, this is where it all comes together.
Yeah, we'll give it a quick blast whenever you're ready.
You want it straight after the torch or a flash after the torch?
No, you're good.
Torch and over?
Okay.
All right, there they go.
Sorry. We're a little hot.
Torch one more time?
No, you're good. I'm not over.
All right, here comes the connection. See how they stop turning and they flip it? There's the joint. Nice connection. You can really see. Now he's going to hold on to that and a little tap and it breaks right off. All right. All right, so one more piece.
Yeah, well, this does like 4 on 1 and then this.
So you can see that Jim's straightening it now. He's turning it. When the lid comes to the high side, he stops. He can use his tweezers to center it up, letting the finial fall back to straight. So this really takes years of practice to, not just to make something this complicated, but to make it so it's perfectly straight and even. All those little joints, every time he stops, it wants to fall off center. All right, so Chris Rochelle is all geared up. He's got his face mask, he's got his gloves, his jacket. He's going to get ready to grab this, put this into the oven. Now, even after Jim's finished shaping it, we still have to cool it down slowly in an oven called the annealer. So if you can see the size of this lid, you can tell how large the vessel is going to be to match the lid. This is going to be a big vessel. Like I said, all the work that's in Jim's book, I was flipping through the pages, and it's like 18 inches tall to 45 inches tall. I mean, they're really, really large, especially once you add these lids to the top of them. All right, we're getting ready. Jim's going to hold it up. Chris is going to grab it. Jeff, you want to get the other side of the door? We're going to put it into the oven. Chris is going to rush over here. We're going to pop the doors. Into the oven it goes, right next to the one he did this morning. How about a big round of applause for James Mongrain? Nice job. Beautiful work. It's not often that you get to watch a master glass blower like Jim working like this. So we're really excited to have him here for the next couple days. For all of you folks at home, today we're live streaming it. Tomorrow you'll have to come watch in person. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break, figure out what Jim wants to make next, and we'll be back to make another piece.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We're here with James Mongrain at the Corning Museum of Glass in our beautiful amphitheater. It's a wonderful afternoon to be inside with temperatures in Corning, New York around 0. You've come to the right place. Our furnace is at 2100 degrees. Everybody's been huddling around and enjoying the warm, festive atmosphere here. Got James Mongrain and his assistant Jay. They're going to be continuing on with the piece that we've been building this morning and into this afternoon. If you're just joining us, we spent a little bit of time, about an hour and a half, making the lid to a vessel. So the lid was a very complicated pattern. It had a beautiful facet, many, many handles that were decorated in a Venetian Italian-inspired technique, something that Jim is well known for. Now we're going to be making the matching and complementing vessel. This will be a beautiful copper blue color. The lid is all copper blue glass, and the vessel will be as well. Welcome to all those joining us on the live stream as well. This event, for those of you in the amphitheater, is being live streamed. So we do a lot of these events throughout the year where you can log in from your phone, your iPad, your tablet, your computer at home and view what's happening in our beautiful amphitheater. Check our website, cmog.org, for other dates and artists that will be coming in. We've got quite the team here, an impressive team of glassmakers. On the main bench, of course, Jim Mongrain, his assistant Jay. We've got George Kennard. And at the other bench right now is Jeff Mack. We also have Chris Rochelle and Megan Matthey. I'm G. Bryan. If you folks have any questions, whether you're here in the crowd or, of course, on the internet, please let us know. That's what we're here to do, answer questions. Let us know anything that you're curious about. Of course, we'll do the best that we can to answer your questions. Now the team's getting started. They have a bubble. That's what Jeff brought over. Jeff brought a bubble of glass, and they'll actually break that free from the blowpipe. They've attached the bubble to a little stem of glass. And George, you were talking with Jim right beforehand. What's the plan for this afternoon's vessel? It's all going to be with the diamond facet mold, the pineapple mold. Excellent. Okay, great. So we're working right now. We have the stem is a pretty stable temperature, and what will be the foot? Right now it looks like a round ball of glass, but believe it or not, this will be opened up, and you think of the foot on a goblet. This will open up wide. This ball of glass will become a bowl, will become a foot. So we'll open it up nice and large. And then I have to assume that we're going to put this into our garage as well. So we're going to put this into an oven when we're finished. Hold it at about 1,000 degrees. It won't change shape at 1,000 degrees. It won't bend or drip or slump if the glass is only 1,000 degrees. If a window pane or a bottle or a jar at home were 1,000 degrees, they would just be 1,000 degrees. They're not going to drip and melt and slump. And the same thing with our stem and foot. It won't change shape unless it gets quite a bit hotter. There's a lot of teamwork involved in glass making, and you can see we have quite the team here. Everybody has to be on the same page. Everybody has to work together, and that's something that most glass makers love about the process, is that teamwork, is that camaraderie. You have to be able to work with people that you trust, and of course people that you like to spend time with. Even though we're off the blowpipe, we can still inflate the glass. And that's what we're doing now. We're using a tool that we call the Soffietta. Sometimes we just call it the puffer. And we inflate the glass even though we're no longer on a blowpipe. Of course, being glass blowers, you see us holding these stainless steel rods, these blowpipes, and these punties, we call them. The blowpipe is the hollow tube, while the punty is the tube that's not hollow. You can't blow through the punty. This metal tool in Jim's hand now we call the jacks. And we've seen Jim using these both to make constrictions in the glass, to squeeze the glass, as well as to open the glass, as well as to create a wider opening. How do we manage to get a camera in there? Yeah, that is a top 10 question here at the museum. And actually, probably from where you're sitting, can you see inside the furnace? You might have to slide over, but you don't see a camera, do you? Yeah, you see this little square. Now that is a little window, and the camera is sitting behind that window. And it's just a regular old camera. There's really nothing all that fancy about the camera. There is a fan blowing on it, and of course we do burn up a camera every now and again with the 2100 degree furnace. But the glass that it's shooting through is very special glass. All right. What's the main ingredient in glass? Silica sand. Yeah, sand's the main ingredient in glass today. And our glass, to get it to melt at a lower temperature, the glass that we use for the art process, the jars, the windows, all that glass has soda ash added to help it melt at a lower temperature. Now, we don't add any soda ash to that. It's pure silica. Our glass melts at about 2,100 degrees. This glass can withstand 3,300 degrees. And it's called fused silica because it's pure silica. It was invented right here in Corning, New York in 1934 by a chemist named Frank Hyde. And he just wanted to make more or less pure quartz, pure silica, and he figured out a way to do it. Now, it became important practically 30 years later when NASA adapted it for the space program. So, the space shuttle, you can't just put a regular old window pane off your like a home or your car. It needs a very special type of glass to withstand the heat of orbit and going in and out of space, re-entry in particular. And so they use this fused silica on space shuttles. And of course, people love it today because it's how fiber optic cable works. It's how the internet works. So fiber optic cable is made from this pure silica, and it allows, of course, light and data to transmit. And of course, it's how the internet works. People love the internet. Facebook, Instagram, researching, all types of different things. And of course, live streaming the Corning Museum of Glass. Very important. Yeah, you're welcome. If you've got more questions, let us know. Well, we just watched him open up the top, right? He got it hot, he spun it, he used the tools. Opening up the top, now we're transferring the piece. And this is a very traditional way to make a piece. You work on one half, and then you can only do so much work. You've got to flip it around and work on the other half. So they attached a temporary handle, that punty, to the other side. And now this will allow him to, work on the top of the stem. You see I'm using different torches. Glass making, it's really all about temperature management. We're called gaffers. That's the term for a master glass blower, gaffer. And a gaffer is someone who understands temperature. They understand why they need it hot, why they need it cool, why they need it somewhere in between. What's going to happen if the glass is hot or cold? Now we see George carrying over the foot and the stem to the garage. And we'll park the piece in that garage. And that garage we consider relatively cool because it's only about 1,000 degrees. We actually have that set for 1,030 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little over 550 degrees centigrade. And again, the glass, it won't change shape at only 1,000 degrees. It's not going to move around in there. It's just going to stay on hold. We're going to leave it parked until we need it later on. We see Jay now gathering up, and he's gathering blue glass from the furnace. We have two furnaces Most hot shops, we're quite lucky, most hot shops have one furnace, and it will normally have clear glass in it. And we have that. We have a furnace that holds 1,000 pounds of clear molten soda lime glass. We also have a smaller furnace where we've been melting copper blue glass. So some of you might be thinking it looks orange, but of course, that's the heat, that's the temperature. At 2100 degrees, pretty much anything, if it's still around, is going to glow bright orange. Now, hopefully you'll be able to see the glass start to grow and expand. We just saw Jim shape the glass up, blow into the blowpipe, and you may have missed it, but he trapped the pressure in there with his thumb. That pressure, of course, wants to go somewhere, so it goes into the molten glass. It has to force its way out. Okay, I see Jay with another gather. You can see all the teamwork going on. Megan stepping in to help inflate the glass as Jim shapes it. This allows Jim to really keep his eye on the glass to help control the shape. Yeah, you see why we're always turning, right? It looks effortless, and then as soon as he stopped with the tool, you saw how it started to move around. When you watch a glassmaker, especially like Jim Mongrain here, it looks effortless. It looks like anybody can just come up and, you know, roll the stick back and forth, and you'll have a beautiful vessel. But of course, that's not the case. It takes years of dedication, a real passion for the material. Now, as the gaffer, you hear him leading the team. Some of you can probably hear him saying, blow, stop, blow harder, blow softer, whatever the case might be. He's the orchestra leader, right? He's the foreman. He's the one in charge. He calls the shots, and he sets the tempo. Everybody's working around him. And then as the gaffer, he sees what's happening. Like he sees Jay over there. Okay, Jay's so far along in his piece. That means I need to be so far along in my piece, etc. Now our reheating furnaces up here, they don't have any glass in them. We have two furnaces that have glass. They're the ones that have the doors on the front of them. And then some of you, like you could see inside the furnace from where you're at, those ones that are open-faced, those ones, there's no glass in. Those are just for reheating. And those have a different yoke in front of them. You can see that yoke. That allows you to set the pipe down, slide it forward so you've got a nice fulcrum point. Allows you to keep it nice and level. Now all of our furnaces up here are running on natural gas. Natural gas. We could be using propane, but natural gas, it's already plumbed into the building, so of course it's very easy, very convenient. We just turn the valve. George. Pardon? Yeah, anytime you burn anything, you're going to have carbon monoxide, fumes like that. But you can see how everything is encased in this huge ventilation hood. And when we built this, you can imagine the safety team, the engineers, everybody has the, when you turn one knob, it changes the ventilation. So more air comes in, the exhaust, you want more exhaust or less exhaust, it'll change the ventilation. And you can see some of the ventilation from up high. And then, of course, it comes in from the sides. We actually, this is a fun thing. This floor where I'm standing, you see the silver line here? This is air conditioning. So today, when it's 0 degrees out, we don't need the air conditioning. But in the summertime, we still have to stand in front of these 2,100 degree furnaces. Well, we can flip up these vents and be working in a comfortable, air-conditioned hot shop. Probably one of the only in the world. Yeah, of course, please. The more questions, the better. Yeah, we've got some torches on. Isn't it a safety hazard? You have to be careful when you're in the hot shop because there are torches, there's molten glass, there's also sharp bits of broken glass on the floor. Those little sharp bits of broken glass can also be 1,000 degrees, so you want to be careful where you walk, whether it's where you're stepping or what you're standing next to. We also have the garage. Again, that's 1,000 degrees. And then the black ovens that you see can be also 1,000 degrees. That's where we're going to put the work when we're done. So we know as glassmakers, everything here is hot. So you assume everything's hot until you learn the other way. You don't assume everything's cold and then touch it to realize it's hot. You assume everything's hot. But a little bit like being a cook in a kitchen, you know, you've got the burners, you've got people walking around with knives, you've got people with hot kettles of soup. And you also, once you spend enough time in any work environment, you kind of understand the workflow. And like, for example, when we see Jim, he's stepping back and forth more or less from the bench to the reheating furnace, maybe to the other furnace. He has a very set pattern. He's probably not going to walk over here to me unless he needs something from me. He'd probably call me, I'd come over to him. I always know that almost always there's going to be a flame right here in the hot shop. I know that almost always there's going to be a flame right there in the hot shop. So my pattern of walking is always going to be not in front of the workbench here because I could get run over with a piece of hot glass. I know that there's something on fire right here, and I know that the ovens are always going to be hot. I'm not going to lean on them. You know, I'm going to keep a very set workflow pattern just like they are. You know, we leave the torches on right now for a couple of reasons. One is because a lot of times we just need them. They're like a pilot light. When we use the torch, we'll actually push, like it. Right now it's just a pilot. So we can use we call it the big fluffy torch. Or we use it to light our hotter torch here. In a live stream, we want to make sure that they're on just so that it looks cool. You know, that's important too. No, but if we're working at the benches here, we'll turn on the pilot light because we know. We also have compressed air. Just like we want certain areas hot, other times you want certain areas cool. So we've got a little, you probably can't see, but you see the little hoses that come up to the bench there. So one of them, the one that's sitting closest to where he sits, that one's actually the compressed air. And then we have two different styles of torches depending on the heating style, the method that we need. Yeah, again, ours are furnaces. The one that Chris is at, for example, that's natural gas, but we could use propane. In fact, George, who was just here, he has a 1,000-gallon propane tank outside his studio in Watkins Glen. He lives up in the hills of Watkins Glen. No natural gas to the house when you live up in the hills there. So his studio, he's got propane. And, of course, if you have furnaces like this, you need a big propane tank. So his is 1,000 gallons. We actually have a state-of-the-art all-electric hot shop in our innovations gallery. And everything there is running on electricity. Our museum has one patent, and it is on that all-electric studio. So we're pretty proud of that, pretty happy with that. And that's because of our partnership with Celebrity Cruise Lines. We actually do glass blowing on the top deck of 3 cruise ships. We're on the Celebrity Solstice. Your mom was on a cruise in Australia, and she saw the glass blowers. Yeah, you were on Celebrity Solstice. And actually, a lot of us here have gotten to travel on Celebrity Solstice, and we got to blow glass for folks like you traveling around in Australia and New Zealand. And Fiji is a nice place to be this time of year. If you can't be in Corning, being on a cruise ship on, January 14 in Fiji is not a bad place to be either. Yep, so we're on the 3 cruise ships, the Celebrity Solstice, Equinox, and Eclipse. And again, everything there is electric, and that's why we have that all-electric studio. But traditionally and historically, these are going to be running on natural gas or propane. Back in the olden days, these would have been running on coal, and prior to that, wood. You can get a wood-fired furnace up to 2,100 degrees, but of course you need a lot of wood. These furnaces require a lot of fuel. Looks like we're building a nice little pitcher, right? This is going to need a handle, isn't it? Do we have a guest artist every day? We do not have a guest artist every day, so you folks are got a special treat. Yeah, you folks are in luck. Now, this is, again, Jim Mongrain from the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area. And he is a gaffer, one of the master glass blowers for Dale Chihuly. Maybe you've heard of Dale Chihuly. If he's a premier name in the glass community and glass art. The great giant green fern, when you bought your ticket and you came in, you saw that big giant green sculpture. Dale Chihuly made that. You'll see his name. If you haven't seen him, you'll see his name now when you go to travel. You'll be like, oh, there's a Chihuly show at the Botanical Garden. Or we were just out in Bentonville, Arkansas, and they had Chihuly in the forest. So you could literally walk through the woods, and there were different Chihulys lit up at night. And oh, yeah, it was really cool. And, I mean, you saw the size of them. They're, 20 feet tall. It's not like a little mini picture on a desk. It's quite a big feat. These handles are fun. You can see the difference in color. Now, of course, all of this color is that same beautiful copper blue, but you can see the temperature difference between that hot molten handle and the rest of the glass being fairly what we might consider cold, but it's still 1,000 degrees. Do we have a question from the internet? Oh, excellent. Which brand, which style, which size? What are Jim's favorite tweezers? Jim, do you have a favorite tweezer, a favorite pair of tweezers, your go-tos? Question from the internet. Ooh, yes. Yep, those are the best. Those are the ones that you like. Okay, great. So the question is about a tool, and in this particular tool, the tweezers, like you see the tool in his hand now. And he actually favors, there's a glass maker, tool maker in Murano, Italy named Dino Tedeschi. And Dino is really well known for, well, all of his tools, but in particular his jacks and his tweezers. And if you come across a pair of jacks or tweezers by Dino Tedeschi, you'll fall in love with them. They're really like the cream of the crop. He passed away a few years back, so he's not making them, and so they're hard to come by. In fact, I just saw a pair of Dino jacks on eBay, and there's 2 pairs, and they have a starting price of $6,000. And it's Megan's birthday today, so if you buy them, you can give them to Megan for a birthday present. But yeah, there's a guy named Dino Tedeschi, and he makes great tweezers. Again, the tool that Jim's using right now are those Dino tweezers. There's a lot of tool makers out there. Well, there's not a whole lot, really, because glass making, it's small. It's not like screwdrivers where there's a million brands of screwdrivers and they make them in every continent. There's not a lot of glass makers out there, but you can still find different glass tool makers for glass. And if you talk to a lot of gaffers or a lot of different glass blowers, they'll all have a different set of, I like tweezers. You heard Jim say, I like tweezers and jacks by Dino Tedeschi. If you ask him about his diamond shears or straight shears, he'll probably say, well, I like my diamond shears by this person. I like my straight shears. I like the big straight shears this person makes, but the small straight shears that this other person makes. There's a tool maker out in Seattle area named Jim Moore. Jim Moore makes great American tools for the glass maker. And my first set of glass blowing tools were all Jim Moore. I still use the jacks and the tweezers by Jim Moore and the straight shears as well. Great tool maker. Now we can see Jay's taking another gather. He's been working away over there just gathering glass, blowing the bubble, gathering glass, shaping the bubble, gathering the glass. Now he's got quite a bit. And in the time that it's taken Jay to get the piece started, you can see how Jim has spent his time making this beautiful little picture. Isn't that nice? Yeah, beautiful. Fantastic. Now the oven that we're putting it in, it looks like it's just a cabinet, but that's actually an oven. That oven is just under 1,000 degrees. And Chris, what is the oven set to? 910? 905. Okay, so this oven is set to 905 degrees, and we've already been loading a few pieces into it today. We're going to keep it on at 905 degrees until we finish the bowl, put it in there, and then when we have everything in there for the night, that's when we're going to start our annealing program, our slow cooling program. This annealer will go from 905 degrees to about 100 degrees overnight. So it's going to take anywhere from 12 to 15 hours to cool down slowly. And that annealing is important for all glass. So whether it's a window pane, a jar of pickles at home, our fancy art glass, all glass, yeah, you can see up here we've got quite a variety of pieces up here. But all glass has to anneal. All glass has to cool down slowly. And I always think it's fun when you look at, for example, up here, I don't know, what do you think we have, 50 or 60 different pieces at least, maybe 70? There's a lot of beautiful pieces up here, and they all started off as more or less a blob of glass in the furnace at 2100 degrees, the consistency of honey, and then shaped all by hand. Spent the night in the oven annealing, and you see them here with literally every color of the rainbow, and we've Megan arranged them like a rainbow this morning. So they go from the reds and the purples all the way through to the blue and then back to purple again. So, yes. Yeah, he was just rolling it back and forth, and he had some funny looking pad on it. That pad that he's using to shape the glass, that's actually our local newspaper. That's the Corning Leader. That's the Corning Leader. It literally is just folded up newspaper. We keep the pad wet, and that allows us to shape the glass with the palm of our hand. Now we've just gone into a mold. This mold is a diamond facet mold. Some people call it a pineapple mold. Some folks call it the Ballatin mold. Whatever you call it, it's going to give our glass a beautiful diamond dimple texture. Now these molds, you can see all the reflections, all the optics, the thick and the thin of the mold. You can see that in there. These molds don't give us a final shape like you think of a Coca-Cola bottle. You blow that into a Coca-Cola bottle mold, it comes out a bottle of Coca-Cola. Our glass, when we blow it into these optic molds, it just comes out with optics. And if you're here in the amphitheater, you can see the different molds that we have, the shapes, the sizes, the patterns. And of course, they're going to give you different shapes, sizes, and patterns of mold texture, but they're not going to give you that final shape. It's not going to give you a vase or a bowl or a Coca-Cola bottle. It's still up to Jim and the team to shape it into what they want it to be. Now again, earlier this morning we made a beautiful lid with all of the ornate handles. A lid that was inspired by a Venetian stemmed goblet, an Italian stemmed goblet. Some of you know Venetian glass or glass from Murano, Italy. And it's very ornate, decorated, lots of components and parts. Jim's lately, he's been making these scaled up versions of the goblets, and he's inspired by Venetian glass. So he's been enjoying, and we've been enjoying having him here making this work. Now here are the jacks. Again, these might be some of those dinos that he was talking about earlier. He's squeezing a small constriction right off the end of the blowpipe. That small constriction, it generally becomes a very rim or the lip. For the pitcher, it was the pour spout. But perhaps more importantly, it's where we'll break the piece free from the blowpipe later on. Everything that we make, we need to be able to remove it, break it free from the blowpipe. So we want it to break free at a very precise line, and we want to control that break. Everybody's broken a piece of glass before. It doesn't always break in a straight line. Think about the last time you dropped a drinking glass in the sink. It didn't break a nice perfect rim. It broke kind of all over the place. Well, we want to control the break. What elements do we use to make a beautiful emerald green? Yes, you can use chromium. Absolutely. There are different elements from the periodic table that give us the different colors that we use. And in this case today, Jim is using a beautiful copper blue. And much as the name suggests, we are using the element copper. So if you look on the periodic table, you'll scroll on down and a little to the right, and you'll see old number 29 there, Cu, copper. Cobalt blue is, of course, a great example, too. Everybody loves cobalt blue, that nice rich blue. Number 27, Co on the periodic table. The name comes from the element used to make it. I was looking at an oil paint set recently, and it had very similar things. We had titanium white, cadmium red, selenium yellow, chromium green. All right, now we've just added a little bit of glass, and yes, that's the same blue. Has that beautiful orange glow because of the heat. Oftentimes when we make a piece, it's not just one lump of glass that we start with. We add parts, bits of glass. We'll call them bits if you add a component. So we brought over a bit of glass. Hot glass sticks to anything hot. So our hot molten glass sticks to our other hot glass. And what we call it is fusing. The two will bond. They'll fuse together. If it were paper, you might say, well, glue it together. If it were metal, you might weld it. But with glass, to get them to stick permanently to bond, we call that fusing. They fuse together. Now, Jim's using the torch to control the temperature, and he asked Jay if he's ready. Let's see what Jay's going to bring over. Okay, Jay's bringing over a solid rod with a little bit of glass on the end. This one we can't blow through. This one we call the punty. They've attached the punty to the bottom. Now they'll break the piece free from that blowpipe at that jack line, that constriction we talked about just a moment ago. Yeah, I think you're right. They do deserve a nice round of applause for a job well done. That's right. Leading the charge. Yeah, that's they make this look incredibly easy. Like that just goes slippery smooth every time. But of course, that's not the case. Jim's been making glass for 30 years. He's got a lot of practice, a lot of experience. And again, like anything, that's what it takes. Whether you want to learn a new hobby, maybe you want to pick up the game of golf, maybe you want to learn to bake, maybe you want to play an instrument. Well, it's not like you're going to just pick up the guitar or sit down at the piano and after a week or two be making beautiful music. It's going to take a lot of practice and, of course, a lot of patience. You're going to play a lot of wrong notes in a row before you make a lot of right notes in a row. Well, when we do that break, when we do that transfer, we have to let the piece get cold enough to break. And for us, that's about 1,000 degrees. And we would consider that cold, 1,000 degrees cold, because we literally break it at 1,000 degrees. We can't shape the glass if it's only 1,000 degrees. It's cold. It's hard like a window pane at 1,000 degrees. So we're going to spend some time now getting the top part hot, getting it molten, getting it malleable so that we can continue to open it. And when we come back from the furnace, you see how the top has that same bright glow to it. Yeah. That tells us we've got some temperature back in there. We're going to be able to shape it when we see that bright orange glow. There's that torch again, spot heating. We were talking earlier, a gaffer is somebody who understands temperature and is a manager of those temperatures. Oh, yeah. Excellent. Any more questions from out here? I see there's a bunch of folks that just walked in. And for those of you who did just walk in, this is James Mongrain. Jim is a master glass blower, a gaffer, and he's well known for a lot of these very fancy Venetian-style techniques. He just has a book out, and George went and picked up, this is George Kennard, one of our master glass makers here at the museum. This is his personal copy. And you can see some of the beautiful, beautiful pieces that Jim makes. And yeah, they're just unbelievable. Venetian inspired. And this book is available in our gift shop, of course. And I would assume, I'm not sure, but I would assume that it's available online, cmog.org. We've got a market where you can buy stuff. And I know it's available on Amazon because I was looking at it on Amazon. But if you can buy it through the CMOG website, you might as well buy it through the CMOG website. Support the local glass community, support your local museum, always a good idea. And while you're on the website, consider becoming a member. For those of you logged in right now, you folks can fill out an online membership and become a member online. Of course, it gives you free admission for you and the family. You get some guest passes. You get our Gather. It's our quarterly newsletter. It's our little magazine that tells you all the happenings that's been going on and what's coming up at the museum. And of course, they'll give you all types of postcards telling you what's going on and invite you to the museum for events like 2300. You'll know that James Mongrain is going to be here at the museum, and you can come out and watch. And membership at our museum gives you free admission to lots of other museums all throughout the country. That's a great point. Yeah, so become a member at our museum and go see some other museums while you're out on a holiday or traveling around, or maybe you're not even from the Corning area. Maybe you're out in California. You can still become a member of the museum and then go see some different museums in California while you're out. That's a great point. Thanks for bringing it up. Yep. Fantastic. Now, we saw them measuring. They were measuring the top. And again, this afternoon, we were making a lid. I see some members now. All right, welcome. Yeah. And, yeah, we made a lid. So to get the lid to fit perfectly into the jar, they had to measure it, right? They used calipers. They used a way to measure it, and then they'll make the opening of the jar perfect. Oh, yeah, look at them open up those jacks. They'll make the measurement of the jar so that it fits the measurement of the lid. If it's too big, obviously the lid will kind of fall in. If it's too small, the jar, the lid won't fit in. So it needs to be precise. It needs to be perfect. That's one of the things that I'm sure Jim would agree with. It's one of the things that really is a lot of fun about glass. One of the things it's a challenge. It has to be perfect every time. And one of those things that no matter how good the piece is that you make, the next one can always be better. You can always do better. Oh boy, that's a great question from the internet. We've got a question about our cherry wood tools. How long do they last? Yeah, you can see we work them pretty hard. Sometimes you'll see them catching on fire. It really depends on the tool and, of course, the glass blower. Some glass makers are going to really burn up. I like to use the wooden board a lot, so their wooden board's going to burn up pretty quick. And others, they might be a little more gentle or not use particular wood tools as often. Our cherry wood blocks, the smaller the block, the more often we're going to use it. Like a small block, we're going to use on every piece. And they might only last a month. They might only last a couple of months. The bigger the block, the less often we're going to use it. We've got blocks that'll last years because we only use them a little bit here and a little bit there. The size 6 and the size 10 block are our two, you use them for every 2 gather piece. You take your first gather, you use a 6 block, you take the next gather, use a 10 block. Our 6 blocks will last about 3 to 4 months. Our other blocks also about maybe 4 to 5. They seem to last just a touch longer. The wooden paddles, these ones, are actually probably about a year old. They've still got some life in them. I know that the ones up on our other theater, our innovation stage, we just replaced those. They were over a year old. And so, new year, new wood tools. We put some new ones up there. We also have some jacks, those metal tongs that you saw us using, those wood jacks, or parchofis some folks call. They seem to last. We've got some that have wooden blades. And those parchofis seem to last about a month. They burn up a lot quicker, it seems like. So I don't know if that helped out. Our wooden tools will last anywhere from a month to a couple of years, depending on what they are. But again, those wooden boards, we use them every day, but they seem to last quite a while. That particular board Chris just set down is about a year old. Some of our other ones might only last 6 months. Great question. Keep them coming. Now, this part of the process is very tricky and it's quite precarious. We need to punty the piece. We need to work on, you see the temperature? It just wasn't right. I was saying how everything needs to be perfect, spot on. And so they're going to change the shape, change the temperature just a little bit of the punty. And what they need to do is, remember they have that foot section, that kind of stem and the foot that they already made. Well, the stem and the foot need to go onto the bottom of the vessel. So they're now punting the inside of the bowl that they created. They're going to break the bowl free from the iron that it's attached to right now, that original punty. And the one that George has, this will become our new handle. Another tap. He said to hold it up, so you can see how he's holding it up, and he'll give it one more flash. A flash is a general overall heat. If you hear the glassmakers say, oh, give it a flash, give it a quick flash, give it a long flash. They're talking about the heat. A flash is a heat of glass, but not hot enough to change the shape, just hot enough to keep it from cracking. If our vessel falls below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it will go through thermal shock. It'll actually crack and break while we're making it. That's, of course, happened to everyone before. That's how you learn. You get it too hot and it drips. It moves off center. It's no longer on center. You get it too cold, it cracks and breaks. But they can know the temperature from experience. You don't see them using a pyrometer or a thermometer to take the temperature. It's a little bit of a sixth sense. They know through experience. All right, now we see Jeff Mack over there with the stem and the foot getting the right temperature. And then, of course, we see Jim here with the bowl, making sure that the bowl is perfectly on center. They're going to, again, use the torch, but they'll use the smaller, hotter torch. That flame, I was told, is about 5,500 degrees. Not the one he's using now, but the oxygen propane torch, the real hot spot heating torch. That one runs about 5,500 degrees, so extremely hot. Jim has we often call it just the fluffy torch or the weed burner. It's a propane torch, no oxygen, no air, just the propane. Again, making sure the temperature is perfect. And then at the other bench, we see Jeff Mack using that hotter torch, the oxygen-assisted natural gas torch. Now again, when they have the temperatures just right, they're going to come over, they're going to attach the stem to the bottom of the bowl, and then they're going to need to tap the punty rod that Jeff has free. Oh, okay, here's the moment of truth. They're going to do it. Now, Jim might actually hold on to it with the tweezers. So he holds on to it, and then that allows Jeff to whack it pretty good. And now we've made the attachment. From here, we have just a little bit of time before that connection cools down. At this point, everything can be a little off center. We need to, in the next one heat, maybe two, make sure that everything, the lip and the foot, are running perfectly even. And in the glass world, we would call it on center. So you can see how right there it was a little off center. You center it up at the pipe first and then move out towards the foot. So it looks like, oh, the foot's a little off center, but that's okay. Again, work from the pipe out. You see they've got a couple of sets of doors open on the furnace. That 2100 degree furnace has a few sets of doors, so as this piece has gotten larger, we've been able to open up the doors, fit the piece in and out. Okay, so once they have the, what they want, they can use this torch to spot heat and move certain sections. You see them taking a lot of what we call flashes, these frequent flashes, long enough to keep the piece hot, to keep it from breaking, but they don't really get it hot enough that it starts to move around. They don't want it, like in the beginning we saw how the glass was really drippy, it was molten, it was running like honey. They're not looking to get the glass hot enough to change shape, just to kind of what we might call tweak, just to change it a little bit and get everything running on center. Boy, you can see there's a great shot from the AV team. You can see that pattern from the diamond facet mold, all those optics. Imagine this piece on your dining room table. The light comes in and it reflects and refracts off all those diamond facet, all those thick and thin spots. It's really going to sparkle. It's going to look very sharp. Okay, you see wooden boards on both the lip and the foot. Again, making sure that everything's nice and straight. If your piece isn't straight now, it's never going to be. So while you have the heat, that it bends around a little bit, you need to make sure it's perfectly flat. Now the tricky part is from here getting it to cool down enough so that it's not going to be moving around anymore, but hot enough that it doesn't break. So they're going to need to get it to just the perfect temperature before they can put it into the annealer, before they can cool this piece down slowly. So you can see everybody here. There's 4 of them working on this one piece together, making sure that it's perfectly on center. You don't want it to lean to one side or the other. You're of course not going to want it to wobble around on your table. While the glass is still hot, this is your one chance. A few more folks have walked in. Again, this is Jim Mongrain from the Pacific Northwest outside of Seattle. He's our guest artist for the next few days. He was over at the studio right across the parking lot, a hands-on facility where artists come down to teach classes all the way from Murano, Italy, parts of Europe, and of course across the USA and Canada to teach. And we get students from all over the world. Can't forget Australia and New Zealand. We've had artists from there come out to teach and take classes as well. Okay, here comes, looks like the moment of truth. We're going to need to break it free from the punty. A nice, oh, look at that. One easy tap. Perfect. It breaks off. We'll get this safe and sound into the annealer. There we go. Beautiful job. That's Jim Mongrain. And his assistant Jay and the whole Hot Glass Show team here. Hot Glass demo team. Wonderful. So again, now that piece is going to sit into the oven, the annealer. It needs to anneal. It needs to cool down slowly.